The morning sun cast long shadows across Fort Bragg as Captain Sarah Chun walked toward the briefing room, her combat boots clicking against the polished floor. At 28, she had already earned respect in the intelligence community, but today felt different. Today, she was stepping into a world where her analytical skills would need to merge with something far more dangerous. The conference room buzzed with conversation as she entered. 12 elite soldiers sat around a mahogany table, their faces bearing the weathered marks of countless missions. These were the best of the best: Green Berets, Navy SEALs, Delta Force operators. Men who had seen action in every corner of the globe where America's interests were threatened. Colonel Martinez stood at the head of the table, his silver hair gleaming under the fluorescent lights. Behind him, a large screen displayed satellite imagery of a compound nestled in the mountains of Afghanistan. The images were crystal clear, showing guard towers, patrol routes, and the distinctive layout of a high-value target facility. "Gentlemen," Colonel Martinez began, then paused as his eyes found Sarah. "And lady, we have a situation that requires immediate attention. Intelligence indicates that Ahmad Rashid, the architect behind the Kabul embassy bombing, is currently held up in this compound. Our window to extract him is closing fast." Sarah studied the faces around the table. She recognized most of them by reputation. Sergeant First Class Jake Morrison, a mountain of a man whose sniper skills were legendary. Captain Rick Santos, whose demolitions expertise had saved countless lives. Master Sergeant Tom Bradley, whose hand-to-hand combat abilities were whispered about in military circles. "The mission parameters are straightforward," the colonel continued. "Infiltrate, capture Rashid alive, extract with minimal collateral damage. Intelligence suggests he has information about 3 planned attacks on American soil. We cannot let this opportunity slip away." Morrison leaned back in his chair, his eyes scanning the room before settling on Sarah. "Sir, with respect, what's the intelligence officer doing in a tactical briefing? This isn't exactly a desk job." A few chuckles rippled through the room. Sarah felt her jaw tighten, but kept her expression neutral. She had faced this skepticism before, though never in such a high-stakes environment. Colonel Martinez raised his hand for silence. "Captain Chun has been tracking Rashid for 18 months. She knows his patterns, his associates, his psychological profile better than anyone in this room. Her expertise will be crucial for mission success." "Expertise is one thing," said Captain Santos, his voice carrying a hint of amusement. "But this is going to be a hot extraction. We're talking about a firefight, not a PowerPoint presentation. No offense, Captain, but intel officers aren't exactly known for their trigger time." Sarah stood up slowly, her hands resting calmly on the table. "You're right, Captain Santos. I don't have your combat experience, but I do know that Rashid has a security detail of 24 men, rotates his position every 6 hours, and has escape tunnels that aren't shown on any of your satellite images." The room fell silent. Santos raised an eyebrow. "Go on. I also know that he suffers from chronic insomnia and takes medication that makes him groggy between 300 and 0500 hours. His guards know this and are less alert during this window. Most importantly, I know that the main compound is a decoy. He's actually staying in the smaller building to the east, the one your assault plan completely ignores." Morrison exchanged glances with Bradley. The room's atmosphere had shifted slightly, but Sarah could still feel the underlying skepticism. "Impressive intel work," Morrison admitted, "but knowing about the target and being able to engage when things go sideways are 2 different things. What happens when bullets start flying? When your carefully gathered intelligence meets the chaos of combat?" Sarah met his gaze steadily. "That's a fair question, Sergeant Morrison. I understand your concerns about bringing someone without extensive combat experience into a dangerous situation." "It's not just about experience," Bradley chimed in, his gruff voice carrying authority. "It's about trust. When the shooting starts, I need to know that the person next to me can handle themselves, that they won't freeze up or make a mistake that gets us all killed." The tension in the room was thick enough to cut with a knife. Sarah understood their position. These men had worked together for years, had saved each other's lives countless times. To them, she was an unknown variable in an equation where failure meant death. Colonel Martinez cleared his throat. I understand your concerns, gentlemen. That's why Captain Shun will be undergoing accelerated combat training with your unit. She'll need to prove herself capable before we deploy. Combat training? Santos laughed, not unkindly, but with clear disbelief. Sir, we're talking about maybe a week before deployment. These skills take years to develop properly. I agree it's unconventional, the colonel replied. But Captain Shun has specifically requested to accompany this mission. She believes there are elements of Rashid's operation that can only be properly assessed on the ground. Sarah felt all eyes turn to her. This was the moment she had both dreaded and anticipated. Gentlemen, I know this seems unusual. I know you have every right to question my presence on this mission. But I've been studying Rashid for over a year. I know how he thinks, how he reacts under pressure. That intelligence could mean the difference between success and failure. Morrison leaned forward. And if we run into heavy resistance? If we need to fight our way out? What then, Captain? Your psychological profile won't stop bullets. You're absolutely right, Sarah replied calmly. Which is why I'm asking for the opportunity to train with your team. To prove that I can handle myself in a combat situation. Bradley snorted. Train with us? Lady, no offense, but we're not running a beginner's course here. Our training methods are designed for operators who already have a foundation in combat tactics. I understand that, Master Sergeant. I'm not asking for special treatment or modified training. I'm asking for the same standard you would apply to any new team member. The room erupted in surprised murmurs. Santos shook his head with a mixture of disbelief and grudging respect. You do realize what you're signing up for? Our training regimen would break most regular Army personnel. I'm aware of the reputation of special operations training, Sarah replied. I'm also aware that this mission cannot succeed without accurate, real-time intelligence about Rashid's behavior patterns and escape routes. Morrison stood up, his imposing frame casting a shadow across the table. All right, Captain Shun, let's say we give you a chance. What makes you think you can handle the physical demands of special operations work? Intel officers aren't exactly known for their PT scores. Sarah reached in her folder and pulled out a sheet of paper. My most recent fitness evaluation. A perfect 300 on the Army Physical Fitness Test, expert marksman rating, and completion of the Army Ranger course. The silence that followed was deafening. Bradley's eyebrows shot up toward his hairline. Ranger school? When did you complete that? 2 years ago, Sarah replied. I wanted to better understand the challenges faced by the soldiers whose missions I was supporting with intelligence. Santos whistled low. Ranger school isn't exactly a weekend camping trip. That's impressive, but it's still not the same as operational experience. You're absolutely correct, Sarah acknowledged, which is why I need to train with your team. To bridge that gap between theoretical knowledge and practical application. Colonel Martinez stepped forward. The decision has been made, gentlemen. Captain Shun will train with your unit for the next 5 days. If she can meet your standards, she joins the mission. If not, she remains behind to coordinate intelligence support from here. Morrison looked around the table at his teammates, reading the mix of skepticism and curiosity on their faces. 5 days to prove you belong with a special operations team? That's ambitious, Captain. I understand the timeline is compressed, Sarah replied. I'm prepared to put in whatever effort is necessary. Bradley laughed, but there was no humor in it. Whatever effort is necessary. Do you have any idea what you're getting into? We're talking about training that will push you past every limit you think you have. I appreciate your concern, Master Sergeant. I'm ready for the challenge. Santos leaned back in his chair, studying Sarah with new interest. All right, Captain. I'll admit, the Ranger tab is impressive, but special ops work is different. It's not just about physical fitness or marksmanship. It's about thinking under pressure, making split-second decisions, trusting your team, and having them trust you. I understand that trust has to be earned, Sarah replied. I'm asking for the opportunity to earn it. Morrison crossed his arms over his chest. 5 days. That's not much time to build the kind of trust we're talking about. In combat, hesitation gets people killed. If you freeze up, if you make the wrong call, it doesn't just affect you. I'm aware of the stakes, Sergeant Morrison, both for the mission and for the team. The room fell silent again as the operators contemplated this unexpected development. They had worked exclusively with other special operations personnel for years. The idea of integrating an intelligence officer into their tight-knit unit was unprecedented. Bradley spoke up first. "What's your weapon of choice, Captain? If you're going to train with us, we need to know what you're comfortable with." Sarah straightened in her chair. "I've qualified expert with the M4 carbine, M9 pistol, and M24 sniper weapon system. For this mission, I was hoping to request something more suitable for close-quarters combat." Morrison's expression shifted slightly. "M24? What did you train on a sniper system?" "During advanced marksman training at Fort Benning. I wanted to understand long-range engagement principles for better intelligence assessment of sniper threats." Santos nodded approvingly. "That shows forward thinking. But training on a weapon system and using it in combat are worlds apart. Have you ever taken a shot with someone shooting back at you?" "No," Sarah admitted honestly. "I haven't been in combat before. But I understand that's exactly why this training is necessary." The honesty seemed to score points with the operators. In their world, admitting limitations was far better than false bravado. Colonel Martinez checked his watch. "Gentlemen, we're burning daylight. Sergeant Morrison, I'm putting you in charge of Captain Chen's training evaluation. 5 days to determine if she's ready for deployment." Morrison nodded slowly. "Understood, sir. Captain Chen, training starts at 0500 tomorrow. I hope you got plenty of sleep last night, because it's going to be your last good night's rest for a while." "I'll be ready, Sergeant Morrison." Bradley stood up, gathering his papers. "Captain, one more question. Why is this so important to you? Why put yourself through what's going to be a hell of a week just to accompany this mission?" Sarah paused, considering how much to reveal. "Rashid isn't just another high-value target to me. He was responsible for the death of my partner during the embassy bombing. Agent Lisa Wong was gathering intelligence on his network when she was killed. This mission isn't just about capturing a terrorist. It's about finishing what she started." The room's atmosphere changed dramatically. The operators exchanged glances, understanding suddenly written on their faces. This wasn't about career advancement or academic curiosity. This was personal. Morrison's voice softened slightly. "I'm sorry for your loss, Captain. That changes things. But it also raises concerns about your objectivity. Emotions can cloud judgment in combat situations." "I understand your concern," Sarah replied. "I've been working through this with a unit psychologist. My personal investment in this mission could be a liability, but it could also be an asset. No one else has studied Rashid as intensively as I have." Santos nodded thoughtfully. "Revenge can be a powerful motivator, but it can also make you reckless. How do we know you won't compromise the mission to get your shot at this guy? Because the mission is bigger than my personal feelings. Rashid has information about planned attacks on American soil. Stopping those attacks is more important than my need for closure." Bradley studied her for a long moment. "That's the right answer, Captain. Let's see if you still feel that way after we put you through our paces." As the briefing concluded and the operators began filing out, Morrison approached Sarah. "Captain, I want to be clear about something. Over the next 5 days, my job is to push you harder than you've ever been pushed before. It's not personal, and it's not because you're a woman. It's because in combat, the enemy won't give you any breaks." Sarah met his gaze. "I wouldn't expect anything less, Sergeant Morrison. I want the same training you would give any potential team member." "Good, because you're going to get it. Report to the training facility at 0500. Bring your gear and be prepared for anything." As Morrison walked away, Sarah felt a mixture of anxiety and determination. She had just committed herself to 5 days of the most intensive training of her military career. The stakes couldn't be higher, not just for her personal mission to honor her fallen partner, but for the success of an operation that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. That evening, Sarah sat in her quarters reviewing everything she knew about the upcoming challenges. Special operations training was legendary for its intensity and psychological demands. She would be tested not just physically, but mentally and emotionally. The question wasn't whether she was strong enough or smart enough. It was whether she could integrate those qualities under the extreme stress of simulated combat. She pulled out a photograph from her desk drawer. Lisa Wong smiled back at her, frozen in a moment of happiness during their last vacation together. They had been partners in the intelligence community for 3 years, had trusted each other with their lives on multiple occasions. Lisa's death in the Kabul bombing had created a hole in Sarah's life that could only be filled by completing their shared mission. But, as she prepared for sleep, Sarah forced herself to acknowledge the truth in Morrison's warning. Personal revenge could indeed cloud her judgment. She would need to find a way to channel her grief and anger into focused determination without letting emotion compromise the mission or endanger her potential teammates. The next morning would begin the most challenging week of her career. 5 days to prove that an intelligence officer could operate alongside the military's elite warriors. 5 days to earn the trust of men who had spent years perfecting their deadly skills. 5 days to transform herself from an analyst into an operator. As she finally drifted off to sleep, Sarah's last conscious thought was a promise to herself and to Lisa's memory. She would either prove herself worthy of joining this mission, or she would fail trying. There would be no middle ground, no partial success. The stakes were too high for anything less than total commitment. The alarm would sound in 6 hours, beginning a journey that would test every assumption she had about her own capabilities and limitations. Tomorrow, the real challenge would begin. The alarm pierced through Sarah's dreams at 0445 hours. She had set it 15 minutes early, knowing that arriving even a minute late would immediately mark her as someone who couldn't handle the pressure. As she pulled on her combat uniform in the darkness, she could feel the weight of what lay ahead. The training facility was a sprawling complex of buildings designed to simulate every conceivable combat environment. Urban warfare mock-ups, desert terrain simulators, mountainous obstacle courses, and underground tunnel systems. Sarah had passed by these facilities countless times during her years at Fort Bragg, but she had never imagined she would be training in them. Morrison was already waiting when she arrived at exactly 0500. He stood beside a table laden with weapons, equipment, and what appeared to be several pounds of tactical gear. Santos, Bradley, and 3 other operators she hadn't met were also present, their faces showing the kind of alertness that comes from years of early morning operations. Captain Chun. Morrison nodded as she approached. Ready for day 1? Ready, Sergeant Morrison. Good, because today we're starting with something basic, weapon familiarization and close quarters combat. Before you can join a special operations team, we need to know you can handle the tools of the trade. He gestured to the table. What you see here represents the standard loadout for a mission like the one we're planning. M4 carbine with various optics configurations, M9 pistol fragmentation grenades, smoke grenades, breaching charges, communications equipment, night vision, and about 40 pounds of additional gear. Sarah studied the equipment, noting that it was significantly more comprehensive than anything she had trained with during Ranger School. The first lesson, Santos added, stepping forward, is that all of this equipment is useless if you can't think clearly under stress. So today's training is designed to put you under progressively increasing pressure while requiring you to make tactical decisions. Bradley pointed to a doorway leading into what appeared to be a mock building. We call this the House of Horrors. It's designed to simulate the kind of close-quarters combat you might encounter during a high-value target extraction. Multiple rooms, multiple threats, civilians mixed in with hostiles, and very little time to make decisions. Morrison picked up an M4 carbine and handed it to Sarah. This will be your primary weapon for the duration of training. I want you to get familiar with its weight, balance, and sight picture. You'll be using live ammunition, so every safety protocol is critical. Sarah accepted the weapon, checking the safety and inspecting the chamber before shouldering it. The weight was familiar from her previous training, but the configuration was different. The optics were more advanced, and additional accessories changed the weapon's balance point. First exercise, Morrison announced, is simple target engagement. We'll start with stationary targets at various distances, then progress to moving targets, then to targets that shoot back with simulation rounds. The next hour was spent in the firing range, and Sarah quickly discovered that her previous marksmanship training was both an asset and a limitation. She was accurate, but she was also methodical. In combat situations, methodical could mean dead. Your groupings are excellent, Santos observed as they examined her targets, but your rate of fire is too slow. In a firefight, you need to balance accuracy with speed. A perfect shot that comes 2 seconds too late won't save your teammate's life. They spent the rest of the morning working on rapid target acquisition and engagement. Sarah's muscle memory from Ranger School served her well, but she could feel the difference between training for competency and training for combat effectiveness. After a quick lunch break, the real challenge began. The House of Horrors was a 3-story building with over 20 rooms, each presenting different tactical scenarios. Some rooms contained hostile targets that needed to be neutralized immediately. Others contained civilians who needed to be protected. Still others were empty, but designed to induce paranoia and stress. The rules are simple, Bradley explained as Sarah strapped on protective gear designed to register hits from simulation rounds. You'll enter with one of us as backup. Your job is to clear each room, make appropriate threat assessments, and protect any civilians you encounter. The targets will be shooting back, so cover and movement are critical. Morrison checked her equipment one final time. Remember, hesitation kills. Trust your training, trust your instincts, and communicate with your partner. I'll be right behind you, but I won't jump in unless you're about to make a fatal mistake. The first room was straightforward, 3 hostile targets positioned behind cover. Sarah entered using the techniques she had learned in Ranger School, but immediately realized that her training had been more theoretical than practical. The simulation rounds stung when they hit, and the psychological pressure of return fire was more intense than she had anticipated. Too slow on target acquisition. Morrison shouted as they moved to the next room. You had the shot, but you hesitated. In real combat, that hesitation would have gotten you killed. Room after room, the scenarios became more complex. Hostiles mixed with civilians, poor lighting conditions, multiple levels, and time pressure all combined to create an environment of controlled chaos. By the end of the first run-through, Sarah was exhausted, frustrated, and covered in welts from simulation rounds. How do you think you did? Santos asked as they reviewed her performance. Sarah wiped sweat from her forehead. Not well. I was accurate when I took shots, but I was too slow to engage, too cautious in my movement, and I failed to properly communicate with Sergeant Morrison in several situations. That's a fair assessment, Morrison replied. But you also showed good judgment in distinguishing between hostile and civilian targets, and you didn't panic under pressure. Those are important fundamentals. The good news, Bradley added, is that these are skills that can be improved with practice. The bad news is that we only have 4 more days to bring you up to operational standards. They ran the house clearing exercise 6 more times that day, each iteration revealing new weaknesses in Sarah's tactical skills. Her marksmanship was excellent, but her battlefield awareness was lacking. She could hit targets accurately, but she struggled with the split-second decisions required in dynamic situations. As evening fell, the team gathered for an after-action review. This was perhaps more intimidating than the actual training, sitting in a room with elite operators while they dissected every mistake she had made. Let's start with the positives, Morrison began. Captain Shun, your weapon handling is solid. You never flagged a teammate. You maintained good muzzle discipline under stress, and your accuracy was consistent throughout the day. Your physical conditioning is also better than expected, Santos added. You kept up with the physical demands without compromising your performance significantly. Bradley nodded in agreement. And You showed good learning capacity. By the sixth run, you were making decisions faster and moving with more confidence. Sarah felt a brief moment of relief, but she knew the criticism was coming. Now for the areas that need improvement, Morrison continued. Your tactical movement is too rigid. You're following textbook procedures, but combat situations require adaptability. Sometimes the textbook solution will get you killed. Your communication needs work, Santos added. In a team environment, silence can be deadly. You need to constantly update your partner on what you're seeing, what you're doing, and what you need them to do. Most importantly, Bradley said, leaning forward, you're thinking too much. Analysis paralysis will kill you in combat. Sometimes you need to trust your instincts and act, even if you don't have perfect information. Sarah nodded, absorbing the feedback. How do I overcome the tendency to overanalyze? It's been drilled into me as an intelligence officer to consider all variables before making decisions. Morrison exchanged glances with his teammates. That's actually one of the biggest challenges you'll face. Your analytical nature is an asset for intelligence work, but it can be a liability in combat. You need to learn when to turn off the analyst and trust the operator. Tomorrow, Santos announced, we're moving to advanced tactical scenarios. Night operations, multiple team coordination, and high-stress decision-making. Today was about individual skills. Tomorrow is about functioning as part of a team. As the operators dispersed for the evening, Morrison approached Sarah privately. Captain, can I give you some advice? Stop trying to be perfect. I know that's counterintuitive, but perfectionism will paralyze you in combat. Sometimes a fast, decent decision is better than a slow, perfect one. Sarah considered his words as she walked back to her quarters. Her entire career had been built on careful analysis, methodical research, and thorough preparation. The idea of making split-second decisions based on incomplete information felt foreign and dangerous. But as she reviewed the day's events, she realized that Morrison was right. Several times during the training, she had identified the correct course of action quickly, but then second-guessed herself and hesitated. That hesitation had resulted in simulated casualties and mission failures. Day 2 began before dawn with a 5-mile run in full gear, followed by weapons training in low-light conditions. Sarah discovered that shooting accurately with night vision equipment was significantly more challenging than daylight marksmanship. The depth perception issues and limited field of view created new complications. Night operations are when special operations teams do their best work, Bradley explained as they prepared for the evening's main exercise. Darkness provides concealment, but it also creates communication challenges and increases the risk of friendly fire incidents. The night training scenario was a simulated hostage rescue. Sarah was assigned to a 4-person team tasked with infiltrating a building, neutralizing hostile guards, and extracting 3 civilian hostages. The complexity was several orders of magnitude beyond anything she had experienced the previous day. Your role, Morrison explained, is entry team member and intelligence coordinator. You'll breach with us, but you'll also be responsible for identifying the hostages and gathering any intelligence materials you find. The mission began at 2,200 hours. Moving through the darkness toward the target building, Sarah felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders. This wasn't just individual training anymore. 3 other operators were depending on her to perform her assigned role effectively. The breach went smoothly. Sarah followed Santos through the entry point, her night vision goggles providing a greenish view of the interior. Room clearing in darkness was exponentially more difficult than daylight operations, but she forced herself to trust her training and move with confidence. In the 3rd room, she encountered her first real decision point. A figure crouched behind a desk could be either a hiding hostage or a concealed threat. In daylight, the distinction would have been obvious. In the green-tinted world of night vision, it required judgment and quick thinking. Sarah made the call. Hostage. She was correct, and the exercise continued. But The psychological pressure of making that decision under time constraint and with limited information was intense. The mission took 45 minutes to complete. When it was over, Sarah felt a mixture of exhaustion and exhilaration. For the first time since training began, she had functioned as part of a team rather than as an individual trying to prove herself. Much better, Morrison observed during the debrief. Your decision-making was faster, your movement was more confident, and your communication was significantly improved. The hostage identification was particularly good, Santos added. You made the right call under pressure, and you did it quickly enough to maintain the mission timeline. Bradley nodded his approval. You're starting to think like an operator instead of an analyst. That's critical progress. But the praise was tempered by continued criticism. Sarah's room clearing technique was improving, but still lacked the fluidity of an experienced operator. Her weapon transitions were slow. Her situational awareness, while better, was not yet at the level required for a real combat mission. Day 3 brought urban warfare training, with scenarios designed to simulate the crowded, chaotic environment of a city under siege. Sarah learned to fight while protecting civilian populations, to navigate through buildings filled with non-combatants, and to make split-second distinctions between threats and innocence. Day 4 was psychological stress training. The scenarios were designed to push her beyond her mental and emotional limits, to see how she would perform when exhausted, afraid, and operating under extreme pressure. Sleep deprivation, sensory overload, and time pressure all combined to create conditions that tested not just her tactical skills, but her fundamental character. It was during Day 4 that Sarah experienced her first real breakthrough. In a scenario designed to simulate the capture and interrogation of a team member, she was forced to make command decisions while under extreme stress. For the first time, her analytical background became an asset rather than a liability. Her ability to compartmentalize emotions and focus on objective facts allowed her to function effectively even under psychological duress. That was impressive, Bradley admitted afterward. Most people crack under that kind of pressure. Your intelligence background actually helped you there. Day 5 was the final examination, a comprehensive mission simulation that incorporated elements from every previous training session. Sarah would be evaluated not just on her individual performance, but on her ability to function as a seamless member of the team. The scenario was remarkably similar to the actual mission they would be undertaking in Afghanistan. A high-value target needed to be extracted from a heavily defended compound. Intelligence indicated that the target had critical information about planned terrorist attacks, but the window for extraction was rapidly closing. Sarah's role was to infiltrate with the team, locate and identify the target using her intelligence expertise, and then assist with the extraction while gathering any materials that might contain actionable intelligence. As the team prepared for the final exercise, Sarah felt a calm confidence that had been absent during her first day of training. She understood now what Morrison had meant about trusting instincts over analysis. Combat situations required a different kind of thinking, faster, more intuitive, but informed by training and experience. The mission began at dawn, with a helicopter insertion several kilometers from the target. Sarah moved with the team through rough terrain, maintaining operational security while covering ground quickly. Her physical conditioning, which had been adequate at the beginning of the week, was now enhanced by improved efficiency of movement and tactical awareness. The assault on the compound was textbook perfect. Sarah breached with the team, cleared her assigned rooms without hesitation, and located the simulated high-value target within the mission timeline. But, more importantly, she did it all while functioning as a seamless part of the team rather than as a liability that needed to be protected. When the exercise concluded, the team gathered for a final debrief. Sarah waited nervously as Morrison, Santos, and Bradley conferred quietly among themselves. 5 days of the most intensive training of her life had led to this moment. The determination of whether she was ready to accompany an elite special operations team into combat. Morrison stood up, his expression unreadable. Captain Shun, when you walked into that briefing room 5 days ago, none of us thought you belonged on this mission. You were an intelligence officer asking to operate alongside some of the most elite soldiers in the world. Sarah felt her heart sink, interpreting his words as a prelude to rejection. But Morrison continued, over the past 5 days, you've demonstrated something that can't be taught, the ability to adapt, learn, and perform under pressure. Your tactical skills have improved dramatically, but more importantly, you've shown that you can function as part of a team. Santos stepped forward. You're not at the same level as operators with years of combat experience, and you never will be after just 5 days of training. But you're competent enough to perform your assigned role without endangering the mission or the team. Bradley nodded his agreement. Most importantly, you've earned our trust. In this business, that's worth more than perfect marksmanship or textbook tactics. Morrison extended his hand to Sarah. Welcome to the team, Captain Shun. Try not to get us all killed. As Sarah shook hands with each member of the team, she felt a profound sense of accomplishment mixed with sobering responsibility. She had proven that she could operate alongside elite warriors, but the real test would come in the mountains of Afghanistan, where the stakes would be measured in lives rather than training scores. That evening, as she prepared her gear for the mission deployment, Sarah reflected on the transformation she had undergone. 5 days earlier, she had been an intelligence officer with theoretical knowledge of combat operations. Tonight, she was a member of a special operations team preparing for a mission that could prevent terrorist attacks on American soil. The journey from analyst to operator had been more difficult than she had anticipated, but it had also been more rewarding. She had discovered capabilities within herself that she hadn't known existed, and she had earned the respect of some of the most elite soldiers in the world. But as she packed her equipment, Sarah forced herself to remember that the training was over. Tomorrow, they would board a transport aircraft bound for Afghanistan, where the enemies would not be using simulation rounds, and the consequences of failure would be measured in lives lost rather than training points deducted. The real test was about to begin. The transport aircraft rumbled through the night sky over Afghanistan, its cargo bay filled with the quiet tension that precedes combat operations. Sarah sat among her teammates, checking her equipment for the 3rd time since takeoff. The M4 carbine felt familiar now, its weight and balance as comfortable as an extension of her own body. 5 days of intensive training had transformed her relationship with the weapon from academic familiarity to operational confidence. Morrison sat across from her, his weathered face illuminated by the red lighting used to preserve night vision. He had been unusually quiet during the flight, and Sarah understood why. Intelligence reports suggested that Rashid's security had been increased following recent coalition activity in the region. What should have been a routine extraction had become significantly more dangerous. 20 minutes to drop zone, the loadmaster announced over the aircraft's intercom system. Santos began his final equipment check, methodically inspecting every piece of gear that would keep him alive during the next few hours. Bradley and the other team members followed suit, their movements practiced and efficient. These men had performed this ritual hundreds of times, but Sarah could see that they never treated it as routine. "Chun," Morrison called out, using her surname as he had since accepting her onto the team. "Run through the target identification process one more time." Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the intelligence photographs she had memorized. Ahmad Rashid, 42 years old, approximately 5 feet 8 inches tall, distinctive scar running from his left ear to the corner of his mouth. Usually wears traditional Afghan dress, but may have switched to Western clothing to blend in. Behavioral markers? Chronic insomnia. Takes medication that affects his coordination between 300 and 500 hours. Paranoid personality disorder that manifests as constant checking of exits and frequent position changes. Trained as an engineer, so he'll likely booby-trap any location he occupies for extended periods. Morrison nodded approvingly. And if he's not in the primary location? Secondary search pattern focuses on the building to the east, specifically the basement level, where he feels more secure. Tertiary locations include the workshop building and the communications bunker. Good. Remember, we need him alive if possible. Dead terrorists don't reveal planned attacks. The aircraft began its descent, and Sarah felt the familiar tightness in her stomach that accompanied the transition from preparation to action. During training, there had always been the safety net of simulation. Tonight, mistakes would be measured in blood rather than missed points on a scorecard. 10 minutes out, the loadmaster called. The team stood and began moving toward the rear of the aircraft, where the ramp would soon open to reveal the dark Afghan countryside. Sarah followed Morrison's lead, her mind running through the mission parameters one final time. Fast rope insertion 2 kilometers from target. Approach on foot through mountainous terrain. Assault at 0330 hours during Rashid's medication-induced vulnerable period. Extract with target and any intelligence materials. Exfiltration by helicopter from a landing zone 3 kilometers south of the compound. 5 minutes. The ramp began lowering, revealing a landscape of jagged mountains and deep valleys illuminated by starlight. The helicopter would hover while the team fast-roped to the ground, then disappear until called for extraction. For the next 4 hours, they would be completely on their own in hostile territory. Sarah checked her night vision goggles one final time and verified that her communications equipment was functioning properly. During training, mechanical failures have been inconvenient. Tonight, they could be fatal. 1 minute. Remember, radio silence unless absolutely necessary. See you on the ground. The helicopter flared into a hover 50 feet above a rocky clearing. Morrison was first down the rope, his descent smooth and practiced. Santos followed, then Bradley. Sarah stepped to the edge, grasped the rope, and dropped into the darkness. The landing was harder than she expected, the rocky ground jarring her knees despite her protective equipment. But she rolled as she had been taught, absorbing the impact and immediately moving to her assigned position in the defensive perimeter. Within 60 seconds, all 4 team members were on the ground, and the helicopter was disappearing into the night. Morrison signaled for movement, and the team began the 2-kilometer approach to the target compound. Sarah had studied the route extensively using satellite imagery, but the reality of moving through Afghan mountains in darkness was more challenging than any map could convey. The terrain was rough and unpredictable, with loose rocks that could betray their position and sudden drop-offs that appeared without warning. But Sarah's week of training served her well. She moved with confidence, maintaining proper spacing and following Morrison's lead through the treacherous landscape. Her physical conditioning, enhanced by 5 days of intensive exercise, allowed her to keep pace without compromising her tactical awareness. After 90 minutes of careful movement, Morrison signaled for the team to halt. Through her night vision goggles, Sarah could see the compound spread out in the valley below them. The intelligence photographs had been accurate. Guard towers at each corner, patrol routes clearly visible, and the distinctive layout that had allowed her to identify Rashid's most likely location. Morrison touched her shoulder and pointed toward the smaller building to the east of the main compound. Even in the green-tinted world of night vision, Sarah could see why her analysis had been correct. The building was positioned to provide multiple escape routes while offering defensive advantages. It was exactly the kind of location that would appeal to someone with Rashid's background and paranoid tendencies. The team moved into position for the assault. Santos would eliminate the guards in the eastern tower. Bradley would secure the main entrance and prevent reinforcements from reaching Rashid's location. Morrison would breach the target building with Sarah providing close support and intelligence expertise. At exactly 0330 hours, the mission began. Santos's suppressed rifle coughed twice in quick succession, and the guards in the eastern tower collapsed without raising an alarm. Bradley moved toward his position, a shadowy figure gliding through the darkness with lethal purpose. Morrison and Sarah began their approach to the target building. The first indication that something was wrong came when Morrison tried the door and found it unlocked. In her intelligence analysis, Sarah had noted that Rashid was obsessively security conscious. An unlocked door was completely inconsistent with his psychological profile. Morrison held up his hand, signaling for Sarah to stop. He spoke into his radio in a barely audible whisper. Possible trap. Target location may be compromised. For a moment, Sarah's analytical mind took over. The unlocked door, the absence of additional security measures, the timing of increased security reports, all of it suggested that their mission had been anticipated. Rashid was either gone or waiting for them. But then Morrison's training kicked in. Analysis could wait. Right now, they needed to clear the building and determine Rashid's location. He signaled for Sarah to cover the entrance while he prepared to breach. The door swung open to reveal a dimly lit hallway. Morrison entered first, his weapon raised and ready. Sarah followed, her heart pounding, but her hands steady on her M4. Room by room, they cleared the building with mechanical precision. The basement level yielded the first significant discovery. Rashid's personal quarters were clearly present. Clothing, medication, personal effects, and a communication setup that confirmed this was his primary location. But the man himself was nowhere to be found. "Chun," Morrison whispered. "How long ago did he leave?" Sarah examined the evidence with practiced eyes. The bed was still warm, medication bottles were open, and there were signs of hasty departure rather than planned evacuation. No more than 30 minutes ago. Something spooked him recently. Can you determine where he went? Sarah studied the room more carefully, looking for clues about Rashid's escape route. Her intelligence training focused on pattern recognition and behavioral analysis, skills that were proving invaluable in the current situation. The secondary escape route, she said with sudden certainty. He's moving toward the communications bunker. It's hardened against assault and has underground tunnels leading to multiple exit points. Morrison spoke into his radio. Bradley, Santos, converge on the communications bunker. Target is mobile and heading for secondary location. The team moved quickly but carefully toward the bunker. Sarah's knowledge of Rashid's behavioral patterns was proving crucial. She could predict his movements based on his psychological profile and previous actions under stress. As they approached the bunker, Santos reported movement inside the structure. "I count at least 4 individuals, possibly more. Looks like they're preparing for a prolonged defensive action." Morrison made a tactical decision that would define the mission's outcome. Bradley, establish overwatch position. Santos, secure the perimeter. Chun and are going in. Sarah felt a surge of adrenaline mixed with fear. This was the moment that all of her training had prepared her for actual combat against a real enemy who was actively trying to kill her. The simulation rounds and training scenarios suddenly seemed laughably inadequate preparation for the reality of facing armed terrorists in their own stronghold. But as Morrison prepared to breach the bunker entrance, Sarah's analytical mind provided a crucial insight. "Sergeant Morrison, if Rashid is in there, he'll have booby-trapped the main entrance. His engineering background and paranoid personality make it almost certain." Morrison paused, considering her assessment. Alternative entrance. Sarah closed her eyes, visualizing the building schematics she had studied during mission planning. Ventilation shaft on the east side leads directly into the main room. It's how he would escape if the main entrance was blocked. Can you fit through it? Sarah measured the distance with her eyes. The shaft was narrow, but not impossibly so. Yes, but barely. Morrison made another command decision. "You go through the ventilation system. I'll wait 60 seconds, then breach the main entrance. When I come through the door, Rashid's attention will be focused on me. That's when you take him." The plan was dangerous and relied heavily on Sarah's ability to navigate through the building's infrastructure while maintaining operational security. But it was also their best chance of capturing Rashid alive. Sarah located the ventilation shaft and began the difficult process of crawling through the narrow space. The shaft was designed for airflow, not human movement, and progress was slow and physically demanding. but her intensive training had improved her fitness and flexibility enough to make the passage possible. After what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, Sarah reached the main room of the bunker. Through the ventilation grate, she could see Rashid and 3 armed guards positioned around the room. They were clearly expecting an assault through the main entrance and had positioned themselves accordingly. Sarah removed the grate as quietly as possible and dropped into the room behind Rashid's position. For a moment, she was completely exposed and vulnerable. If any of the guards had turned around, the mission would have ended immediately. But Morrison's training had emphasized the importance of decisive action. Sarah moved quickly but quietly, positioning herself where she could observe all 4 targets while remaining concealed behind equipment racks. Morrison's voice crackled through her earpiece. 60 seconds up. I am breaching. The explosion of the main door sent shockwaves through the bunker. The guards immediately turned their attention toward the entrance, exactly as Morrison had predicted. Rashid shouted orders in Pashto, coordinating his men's defensive positions. This was Sarah's moment. She stepped out of concealment, her weapon trained on Rashid. Ahmad Rasid, United States Army. You are under arrest. The terrorist leader turned toward her voice, his scarred face showing surprise and anger. For a split second, time seemed frozen as Sarah faced the man responsible for her partner's death. Every instinct screamed for revenge, for the simple satisfaction of pulling the trigger and ending the life of someone who had caused so much pain. But Morrison's training held firm. The mission was larger than personal revenge. Rashid had information about planned attacks on American soil. That information was more valuable than any personal satisfaction she might gain from killing him. Drop your weapon, Sarah commanded, her voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her system. One of the guards swung his rifle toward her position. Sarah's response was instantaneous. 2 shots to center mass, dropping the threat immediately. Her training had taken over, muscle memory guiding her actions without conscious thought. Morrison burst through the main entrance, his assault rifle cutting down another guard who had turned to engage him. The 3rd guard found himself caught between 2 operators and surrendered quickly. Rashid, seeing his security eliminated, reached for a weapon. Sarah shifted her aim from center mass to his shoulder, placing a precise shot that disabled his gun arm without killing him. The terrorist leader collapsed, wounded but alive. Targets secured, Morrison reported over the radio, requesting immediate extraction. As Sarah applied first aid to Rashid's wound, ensuring he would survive for interrogation, she felt a complex mixture of emotions. She had faced combat and performed effectively. She had proven that an intelligence officer could operate alongside elite warriors. Most importantly, she had honored her fallen partner's memory by completing their shared mission. But as the helicopter approached for extraction, Sarah realized that her transformation was complete. She was no longer just an analyst who had learned to fight. She had become something new, a hybrid operator who could bridge the gap between intelligence and action. Morrison approached her as they prepared Rashid for transport. Chen, I need to ask you something. When you had him in your sights, when you could have taken revenge for your partner, what stopped you from killing him? Sarah looked at the wounded terrorist leader, then back at Morrison. Because Lisa Wong didn't die, so I could get revenge. She died gathering intelligence to prevent attacks on innocent people. Completing that mission is how I honor her memory, not by satisfying my personal need for vengeance. Morrison nodded slowly. That's the difference between an operator and a killer. You've got the heart for this work, Sean. As the helicopter lifted off, carrying them towards safety with their high-value prisoner, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. 5 days earlier, she had been an intelligence officer asking to accompany a special operations mission. Tonight, she was a proven operator who had successfully completed one of the most challenging missions of her career. But more than that, she had discovered that the line between analyst and operator was less clearly defined than she had believed. The best intelligence work required understanding not just what enemies were thinking, but how they would act under pressure. And the best operational work required the kind of analytical thinking that could predict enemy behavior and adapt tactics accordingly. As the helicopter flew through the night toward the forward operating base, Sarah began planning her next mission. There were other high-value targets to capture, other planned attacks to prevent, and other intelligence puzzles to solve. But now she would approach them not just as an analyst, but as someone who understood both the theoretical and practical aspects of special operations. Morrison caught her attention over the helicopter's intercom. "Chun, there's something you should know. Command has been watching your performance this week. They've got plans for operators with your unique skill set." Sarah looked up with interest. "What kind of plans?" Morrison smiled, the first time she had seen him look genuinely pleased since they had met. "Ever heard of a program called Black Talon? It's designed for operators who can bridge the gap between intelligence and action. Analysts who can fight, operators who can think. People exactly like you." As the helicopter carried them home through the darkness, Sarah realized that her journey was just beginning. The week of training had been preparation not just for one mission, but for an entirely new career path that would combine her analytical skills with newly proven operational capabilities. The transformation from analyst to operator was complete. Now the real work could begin.